Mary and I met probably 25 years ago. I know we
Long
traveled
time
together about
ago.
in 2000-ish.
Long ago, yeah.
So we had an opportunity last night to really talk and share stories, and it was such a blessing to hear all the experiences of God and Christ that have gone on in the last many years. And you've had quite a journey and many things. So I'm really thankful to have you here, and um, God has worked in your heart in many ways. So
Yes.
thanks for coming to share with us. And
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thank you, everybody. I'm Mary. So just so you know a little bit about me, I actually live outside the Buffalo area in one of the suburbs of Buffalo. Go Bills, right?
Yes.
Let's squish the fish.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, years ago I was in the way. I actually had a extremely powerful encounter with Jesus Christ while I was living in a tent in the redwood forests of California, because I was so broken and so exhausted from carrying the pain and the weight of this life in my heart. And he came. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody knew where I was. My parents didn't know, my friends didn't know. And he came and got me. Jesus Christ came and got me. And my life has not been the same since. An incredible, as Peter said, journey with Jesus through the years, for which I am extraordinarily thankful. And you guys aren't going to be able to hear me because you can hear me fine. After that happened, he led me to the Way, and I was involved in the Way for 12 years. I was in the 7th Way Corps, did the whole Way thing. 1987, I left there, and I've lived in Buffalo ever since. It's where I was raised, my parents, and believe it or not, even after I left the Way, even after I didn't go to fellowship, he was with me. He has never stopped leading me, teaching me, guiding me, speaking to me, loving me. You couldn't ask for more from a Savior. You just couldn't ask for more. So during the pandemic, the Great American Shutdown, I spent those 12 weeks, because I lived by myself, right? And so I was alone for 12 weeks. Now, I did Zoom with people, and I did talk to people on the phone, so I wasn't completely alone. But I spent a lot of time alone. And I did a study. I looked at every place in the scriptures where the word faith or the word believe was used in the New Testament, not the Old, New Testament. It's used a lot, right? It took me 12 weeks to do this silly thing. And I came away with one great truth that stood out to me so clearly as I did this. The New Testament teaches us to believe one thing. One thing we're to believe. And that one thing is that Jesus Christ is who he said he is. We are to believe in Jesus Christ as our Lord, our Savior, our Redeemer, and that he is, he's it. He's it. He's all there is for us, right? Without him, there's nothing. And so this little sharing that I'm going to do with you today is an outgrowth of that study that I did. So I want to talk a little bit about your faith. Your faith. And as it turns out, faith has degrees or amounts or levels. It's not the same all the time for everybody. It's different in different people, different times, different circumstances. And it turns out faith can grow. It needs to grow, right? So we're going to take a little look at this. Now, those of you who are veteran Bible students, I'm going to go to passages that you have probably read 100, if not 1,000 times. But do it with me. Don't say, oh, I've been here, done that, or, oh yeah, I know this section of scripture just fine. I don't need to learn anything more about it. Because I'm just going to show it to you in a slightly different way, maybe than you've ever seen it before. Okay? And if you've seen it this way, God bless you, and come tell me about it afterwards, and we can chat about your experiences with faith, and I would love to do that. Also, I'm open to any questions, but if you could just hold them till later, that would be great, because I want to get through this in a timely fashion and not hold you up because I hear there's food in the kitchen. So you never want to get between people and their food, right? It's not a good idea at all. And the game starts at 1, so we got to get out of here. No, I'm kidding. Totally kidding. We got to squish the fish. Yeah. Well, if we show up, we win, right? That's how it works. If we're there mentally, we win.
Yes.
So, turn to Matthew chapter 9, if you will, and in verse 20. So Matthew 20, verse 9. Oh, good start, Mary. Matthew 9, verse 20, and it says, "And suddenly a woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years, came from behind and touched the hem of his garment." She had said to herself, if only I could get close enough to just touch him, I will be made well. And Jesus turned. When he saw her, he said, "Be of good cheer, daughter. Your faith has made you whole." He didn't say his faith. He said her faith. Her faith. Well, what did she have faith in? What did she believe that caused her faith to acquire this healing that she had needed for 12 years? Well, I would say that we are told in verse 21 what she had faith in. She said in verse 21, "For she said to herself, if only I can touch his garment, I shall be made whole." She believed in Jesus. She believed that this man, who she probably had heard things about and perhaps had seen herself, she believed that somehow this man, who seemed to be able to heal people, was going to heal her. She believed in Jesus. Okay, so I can so relate to this because in about 2005, 2006, I heard about this church up in Toronto that was having this, what they were calling a revival, right? And so, it piqued my interest. And so off I went to Toronto, living in Buffalo. That's not that hard to do, except the traffic is crazy, but I made it. And I discovered this church that worshiped in a way I had never experienced worship before, right? That's why you're so blessed to have these wonderful worship leaders for this group here. So yeah, the worship brought Jesus into the room this morning. There's no doubt about it. And so anyway, at one point, after I'd been going there for quite a few times, and I was at a conference, right? And I was deep in worship. The worship would last like an hour and a half before they even started making announcements and teaching. You know, it would go for a really long time. And the whole huge congregation, people came from all over the world to see this, to experience this, right? And you would just be so in the presence of Jesus Christ. And so I was deep, deep in worship. And he came. And he stood right in front of me. And it was so real that I reached out my hand to touch him. And I could feel, now this is my spiritual senses, right? I know he wasn't there physically, you know, but my spiritual senses, I reached out to touch his robe. And I could feel the robe in the small of his back. I touched him. And you know what he said to me? He said, "I love you very much." That's what he said to me. He said, "I love you very much." And I said, "Well, I have no idea what there is about me that you could possibly love." And he said, "You don't understand what love is." And he said, "Love loves. It just loves. It doesn't look at the object of its love and judge it. It just loves." It's almost as if he can't help but love, right? Love is the essence of who he is. He loves you. He loves me. And that revelation transformed my life once again. It was like, for the first time in my life, I felt loved. Now, there's human beings who tell me they love me. And there's human beings, I tell them I love them. But I had never experienced this kind of love. This was something different, right? This is who he is, right? Okay. Back to the woman in the scriptures. She had the faith in Jesus it took to be made well. He turned to her and he said, "Be of good cheer, daughter. Your faith has made you whole." She had the faith to be healed. Okay. Now let's look at someone who had little faith. Not sufficient faith, but little faith. Okay? Who might I be talking about? Anybody want to guess who I might be talking about?
Peter?
Yes, very good. Let's go to Matthew 14, verse 20. Matthew 14, yeah. Now, you know, we used to go like this when we were going to look up a verse of the Bible. Now we go like this. How things have changed. Matthew 14, verse 22. And immediately he made the disciples enter into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he sent the crowd away. And after he had sent the crowd away, he went up by himself into the mountain to pray. And when evening had come, he was there alone. And the boat was already a long way from the land, being battered by waves, because the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost! It's a ghost!" And they cried out for fear. But immediately, Jesus said to them, I love this. I love this. He said, "Do not be afraid. It is I. It is me." Right? No need to be afraid if he's there. Right? Don't be afraid. It's me. And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if..." "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." You better pass this test for me there, ghost who calls himself Jesus. If it's you, here's the test I want to put you to. Let me walk on the water too. And he said, "Good, come." And Peter went down out from the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind, he became afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, now isn't this just like us, right? If it's you, Lord, if you're really who you say you are, I don't know, I've got to, put you to a test. And then we need him. Lord, Lord! Right? Isn't that exactly what we do?
Yes. Yes.
Right? All of a sudden we want him to be who he says he is. And Jesus didn't say, "No, Peter, you doubted. Too bad."
Right.
Jesus immediately reached out and pulled him up. And said, he did make a point. He said, "Oh, you of little faith." So faith can be little. Faith can be sufficient, or faith can be little. Oh, you of little faith. Right? Why did you doubt? Kind of sets up a kind of a opposing thing there between little faith and doubting. So maybe more faith, less doubting. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Wonder how hard it was to get in that boat, right? The wind and everything, but it's soaking wet. But they get in the boat, and the wind ceased. And those who were in the boat bowed down before him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Oh, poignant, but also powerful, right? It's like, wow, you really are who you say you are. You really are who you say you are. So why did Jesus describe Peter's faith as little faith? Because as Jesus said to him in verse 31, he doubted. He didn't just doubt, I've heard it taught many, many, many times that he looked at the circumstances around him and he became afraid, and that's what made him sink. But Jesus doesn't say that. He says, you doubted. And he doubted long before he ever got out of the boat to walk on the water. When Jesus said, it's me, he said, if. If it's you, pass this test I'm putting in front of you. So Peter had not yet gotten to the place in his life, because we know what happened to him, right? He became an extraordinary man of faith. But at this point in his life, he only had a little faith. He had a little faith. But I think this was a great learning experience for Peter.
Yeah.
And a great learning experience for the other disciples in the boat. Because they all saw it all, experienced it all, right? This wasn't they read it in a book. This is real life, right? They're in a boat that's getting beaten all over the place, and he comes and walks on the water, and they see Peter, and they see what happens to Peter, and then he gets in the boat, and the storm stops, and they said, wow, you really are the Son of God. Wow. So their faith in him grew. Their faith increased. They believed it better, more, right? My brain can't do this without notes anymore. You know, I turned 73 2 weeks ago. That is shocking to me. Thank you. I deserve that. It hasn't been easy. I deserve that applause. It's shocking to me that I'm that old. I just can't quite process it yet. But let's go a little further in Matthew to chapter 15, to verse 21. And here we learn of another woman, a woman of Canaan. She was a Canaanite. She wasn't an Israelite. She was a Canaanite. They warred with the Canaanites, right? They didn't get along with the Canaanites. She probably grew up in a culture that worshipped other gods. She was a Canaanite. But she loved her daughter very much. And her daughter was possessed with a demon. So Jesus went out from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. But he answered her not a word. He didn't respond to her. And then his disciples came and said, would you get rid of her, Lord? I mean, she's really bugging us. It's very irritating that she keeps following us and asking us to help her with her daughter. And he answered and said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then she came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered and said, it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. And she said, yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Oh. Then Jesus looked at her and he said to her, O "O woman, great is your faith." A Canaanite had great faith. In what? In him. In another section it said she had heard about him. She had heard about him and was seeking healing for her daughter. She believed he could do it. Now let's take a little closer look at this. She seemed to know, and right? She called him the son of David, right? So she was aware of the Israelites, kind of what they believed. Jesus said no to her 3 times. He said no 3 times. She wouldn't take no for an answer. She changed his mind. What? She changed his mind. That, he says, is great faith. Isn't that amazing? The only other person I know, and I don't know I've never looked at this. The only other person I know that changed God's mind in the Old Testament was when Abraham argued for Lot to be spared from Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Mm-hmm. This woman, this Canaanite woman, changed his mind. And he called that great faith. I wonder how many of us, don't have to raise your hands, I won't embarrass you, I'll raise mine, right? Would continue to pray for something, and he said no to you 3 times already, but continue to pray for it anyway. How many of us continue to pray with faith when he doesn't answer right away? Like, what's your allowed time span for him? Right? How much time do you give him? Like, an hour, a day, a month, a few years?
Till you take your last breath.
Right? Until you say, oh, heck with you, you must not love me. You don't do what I want. Right? So the question clearly becomes here, how can I grow or increase my faith to the end that it is great faith? How do you do that? Go to 17. And in verse 14, we have this parable of the sower and the seed. We've heard it 1,000 times. How many of you have heard it taught more than 50 times, do you think, in your life? Right? Yeah, it's a favorite. So I'm just going to summarize because you all know it. In verse 14. Okay, let me get myself oriented here, right? Where did I summarize it? Okay, here it is. In verse 19, the person hears the word but does not understand it, doesn't attempt to understand it, and it is easily snatched away, right? In verse 20 and 21, the person hears the word and receives it with joy, but it doesn't become rooted in his or her heart. And so when it starts to get difficult, right? When the going gets rough, when he doesn't do what we tell him to do, right? You fall away. Stumbles or only endures for a little while.
What's our reference, Mary?
Hmm?
Where are you reading from?
I am reading from Matthew 13. I'm sorry, I've confused you.
Okay.
Oh, Matthew 13, yeah.
Thank
I've gotten ahead of myself, but I'll figure it out.
Just so we can.
Yeah. Verse 22, the person hears the word, but the cares and the stress and the worry and the anxiety. Anybody ever experience any of those things? No, you don't? Wow.
I was mean.
I want to be around you more.
I'm always nervous and anxious.
Right? The cares, the stress, the worry, the anxiety, the fear, or the draw, the lure, the temptation, the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, right? And he or she becomes unfruitful. It doesn't have an effect in their life. It doesn't produce fruit in their life. Or in verse 23, the person hears the word and understands it and bears fruit, right? He understands it. He takes it into him or herself, and it begins to bear fruit. Some people 100%, some people 60, some people 30. I don't think that's the point here. Which yield you produce, right? I think it's that the word is living in you and it's producing fruit in your life. Okay, I got to go back a little bit because I skipped a part. So, back in Matthew 17, this section, verse 14, chapter 17, verse 14, this is the record of the man who brought his son to the disciples because he was an epileptic. And remember, he was getting thrown into the fire. And they couldn't throw him out. So Jesus said in verse 20, the disciples came to Jesus, and Jesus healed them. Okay. Get it together here, Mary. Jesus healed them, right? Kid is fine. But the disciples say to Jesus, why couldn't we do it? We tried. We prayed. Anybody ever here prayed for someone and nothing happened? Yeah, what is that? But anyway, they tried. They couldn't do it, so they came. And Jesus asked Jesus, and Jesus said to them, because of your unbelief. Your little faith. It's little faith. It didn't say they didn't have any faith. In some translations, it's actually translated little faith. I think in the REV it is. So he said, because you have little faith. Then he went on to say, assuredly. Listen, assuredly, I say to you, if you have the faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Now, I've heard it taught many times in my very long life. And I've had Christians say to me, right, you only need the faith of the size of a mustard seed, right? Because the mustard seed is just this tiny, tiny little seed. You only need a little faith to move a mountain or do the impossible. Well, that can't be true, because the disciples couldn't cast out the demon because they had little faith. So how could it be true that if you have little faith, you can do the impossible? That doesn't make sense, right? So it can't be that this means you just have to have little faith. So Jesus here is equating faith as or like, right? He's setting up a comparison. Faith as a mustard seed must equal great faith, because little faith can't do the impossible. But great faith can change his mind. So let's go to Matthew 13:31. And here, just, previous to this whole thing happening with the man and his son, Jesus had put forth another parable to them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all seeds." It's a tiny little seed. But when it is grown, it is greater than all the other plants around it and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and rest in it, nest in it. So this strongly infers to me that a person's faith is like a mustard seed, in that it begins as a tiny seed within us, but it has to grow. And in order for a seed to grow into a plant, to grow into a tree that's bigger than all the other plants around it, the soil has to be rich, has to be fertilized, has to have some nutrients in it. And the plant has to be tended to. It has to be fed, it has to be watered, it has to be nurtured. This is what plants need. So then the question becomes, I used to not like that parable at all, because I thought maybe I didn't have the good soil in my heart, but it turns out I did. I'm sure everyone has good soil to some degree, or, some days you have better soil than others too, right? Now clearly everyone here has a heart of good soil and blah, blah, blah. So how do we fertilize and develop the soil of our heart? Because that's where the faith lives. The how of doing this is the key to growing our faith. Right? If we learn how to tend to our soil, the soil of our heart, that is key to us growing our faith. To the end, the goal is to have great faith. And I believe that the key to growing our faith is something called spiritual formation or spiritual transformation. Now this takes us to Romans 12. You all know these verses, especially if you were in the way. Boy, you could, this was a retemery, right? You could spout this one. Okay. In verse 2 it says, "And do not be conformed to this world." Let me just take a look here real quick. This takes us back to this parable of the seed and the sower. Just for a minute, let me regress. Okay, so you got these different kinds of soil in different people's hearts. And Jesus is drawing a comparison between our hearts and different types of soil. When a seed of faith is sown through the truth being spoken or offered to us in some way, different people respond differently to it. Now, so how do we fertilize and develop the soil of our heart? Okay, we've got to be transformed. In Romans verse 12 it says, and do to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now, it doesn't say that you do the transforming. It tells us to be transformed, that something is going to act on us that is going to transform us. It's in the passive voice for you English majors. Not too many of you here. I didn't think so. And having a renewed mind is not the same thing as being transformed. It says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So renewing your mind is part of a process by which we are transformed. It's the vehicle, it's the means by which we're transformed, but they're not the same thing. So here we're told that the believer is transformed. The believer does not do the transforming. The believer is transformed by the renewing of his or her mind. In order to experience the transformation, it is necessary to renew one's mind. Therefore, it becomes imperative to understand what it means to renew one's mind. Well, it goes on to tell us, right? It says, generally speaking, it says, be part of the body of Christ, know who you are, function the way the Lord wants you to function. And then it goes on to walk by the Spirit, love without hypocrisy, hate evil, cling to good, be affectionate towards one another, honor one another, be diligent in pursuing the things of God, be eager for spiritual things, be committed to serving the Lord, joyfully await the return of Christ, be patient in trials and tribulations, pray steadfastly, be generous towards those in need, be hospitable towards others, bless those who persecute, be empathetic, treat others equally without deference to fame or money or status or name recognition, associate with the lowly, don't overestimate yourself, do not repay evil with evil. Do the honorable thing. As much as possible, live peaceably with all men and women. We're included. Don't seek revenge. I want to add here, it's okay if I just add a word here, right? Don't hold grudges. If your enemy, not a poor person in your neighborhood, if your enemy is hungry, feed him or her. If thirsty, give them drinks. Be loving and kind. Overcome evil with good. I don't know about you guys, but that's a pretty high standard. That is a really high standard. Anyone here feel they've got all of this mastered? You know, that's not a rhetorical question. I mean, really, if you look at yourself and look what goes on in your mind and heart when no one's around and someone's just done you wrong, right? Do you live up to this? In 1 Corinthians 13, when it's listing the characteristics of love, it says, and this bothered me for years, because I thought, well, this is impossible. It says, thinks no evil. Right. Doesn't even think it. I'm not there yet. There are moments, there's no evil in my thought. There might be hours, might even be days. But then, boy, something happens. Whoa, right? So this is a very high standard. And isn't it interesting that it's telling us here that doing these things isn't what it means to be transformed? Really? Doing these things is the means to being transformed. So what's transformation? This seems pretty transformative to me, right? Yeah. But here's the thing, right? You can do this. You can act this way. You can say all the right things, behave in all the right ways, take all the right actions, but your heart is not the same. These are still external things. These are actually of the flesh, right? They can be mimicked. And it's been my experience that there are people out there mimicking them. Right? So if I did these things, I was a Christian. But they're telling, Romans is telling us, no. I mean, it's great. You've come a long way from that, you know, alcohol guzzling, pot smoking hippie you used to be. You've come a long way, but it's still not it. So what is it? Now there's an author I've stumbled upon quite a few years ago, and Greg confirmed that he's an amazing, well, he's dead now, but Dallas Willard. Okay, Dallas Willard was the head of the Department of Philosophy at the University of Southern California. He was a philosopher, you know, right in there with the Kierkegaards and the Descartes and the... But he was this devout Christian man. And he wrote a number of books. And one of them is this book called The Renovation of the Heart. Now, he's talking about this in this book. And he says, external manifestations of Christ likeness. Okay, that list. Those are external manifestations of Christ likeness. Is not or are not, however, the focus of the process of being transformed. Emphasizing certain behaviors and activities can actually distract us from the real work of the transformation of the heart. We must go beyond the righteousness of our own efforts to allowing the Spirit of Christ to do a deep, deep, deep cleansing, transformative work within the depths of our being. He goes on to write, transformation, in this context, spiritual transformation of our hearts, is the reality of Christ coming to bear on an individual human being's heart. Knowing it's not about acting. It's about having the Spirit of Christ be working within you in the deepest places of your heart to produce an inner being. Inner is like his inner being. That's what it is. Spiritual formation or transformation is the process by which a person is changed on the inside. It is the means by which Jesus transforms us in the very deepest places of our heart, of our inner being, to the end that our inner being is like his inner being. And to know him at this level is to know that I'm not just like him. I wish I was, but I'm not. And that's why I need him so desperately to do this work within me and change me, teach me, guide me, work in me, so I become more like him. Right? I'm proposing that it is this process of living in that place of presence with him where you see him. You literally see him doing it. He's working within you. He's teaching you things. He's changing you. That is the process by which the soil of our heart is fertilized and cultivated and enriched. It is the process by which the mustard seed of faith that's been planted in our heart grows. It is the process through which we grow into great faith. Great faith. For me, this has been a lifelong journey. Started as long as I can remember, right? Started in a Catholic church in Tonawanda, New York, right? First revelation I ever received. I was probably about 11 or 12 years old. I was sitting in a mass in St. Amelia's Church on Eggert Road in the town of Tonawanda. And Jesus spoke to me. I didn't know it was him, but he did. And to this day, I remember exactly what he said. But the important thing was I heard it, right? And it's a very specific voice. It is not your own thoughts. It's a real thing that happens, not here, but here, right? Anyway, it's been a lifelong journey for me, a journey I'm continued to be on. Walk a little slower these days. Had to have the knees replaced. Now, not easy anymore, but it's a journey I continue to pursue. This is not a one-time event. This is not automatic because, hey, I've been a Christian for 50 years. It has nothing to do with it. Or I was in the Way Corps. Or I study the scriptures. Or I do this. It's about so humbly and so devoutly presenting yourself to him and saying, Lord, change me. Find the things in me that aren't like you and make them like you. Right? Now, I would recommend this, but you're probably not going to, so don't spend your money, because it reads like a philosopher wrote it, and that's because a philosopher wrote it. And it's taken me years to get to the halfway point. Let me try this one. Okay, this one is called Practicing the Way. It has nothing to do with the Way International. But this man, John Mark, all live out in California. What's so great about California? What's wrong with Buffalo, right? It's not California.
It's too cold here for them.
Yeah. But he presents this process in a very simple way, which I love. And he says it's about being with Jesus, being with him, spending time with Jesus, not with other Christians. Spending time in the quiet privacy of your own heart and getting in touch with him, feeling his presence, knowing he's there, and spending time in that place with him. Right? He once said to me, a number of years ago, he said, you know, Mary, oh, he knows my name. He knows me by name. He says, you know, Mary, I'd really like to spend more time with you. Now, I have not really had that experience among human beings. Yeah, and no, yeah, maybe when I was being courted as a 18-year-old, but yeah, there was an edge to that. Listen, Mary, I'd really like to spend more time with you. And I try. Okay, Lord, here we go. Put on the music, position myself for spending time with the Lord. And my mind is like this wild animal. Right? It's just going and going and going. And I keep, oh, I'm sorry, Lord. Okay, let's try this again, right? And then, so it's not easy. But it's a discipline, right? Just like learning how to do this on a... You know what this is? If you've raised children in the last 20, 30 years, you know what this is, right? A discipline like strengthening your muscles, right? It's something you have to develop. And it's hard. But he wants us to know him. Whoops, my earring fell off. Okay. Oh, see, 73, picking something up is not what it used to be. Am I right, huh? Not what it used to be. Okay, I'll try to get this in real quick here. So where was I? Oh, yeah. Where was I?
Spending time.
Spending time, yeah. He wants us to know him. Because if you don't know him, if you don't know him, if you know things about him, but you haven't experienced him, you start believing things about him that aren't true. You start believing that he loves some people more than others. That he honors some things that some people do more than he honors what little old me does. That he gets mad at us. That he judges us. That he finds us lacking. But he doesn't. That's what's so unique about his love. He doesn't do those things to us. His love loves. It just loves. Anyway, John Mark Comer, spend time with Jesus. As you do that, you will become more like him. Not your actions. He's not looking for us to mimic. We become more like him in the inner depths of our being. And as we do that, then we do as he did. Then I will say, we develop great faith. And I think great faith and knowing his love for us is this absolutely linked thing in our hearts. Because if you truly believe that he loves you, you won't doubt his intentions towards you. You won't wonder if you're displeasing him, or if you're not enough, or if he's judging you harshly, right? He just loves you. Let me give you one last definition. I think for me, worship has been key to my being able to be in his presence. Music lifts and opens the human heart, right? Do you all know that experience where you're listening to something and it just expands you, okay? When you're doing that with worship music, right, you can get into this place of worship where you're right there with him and he's right there with you, right? And so I wondered if we could just close. Just want to play this. I was going to have us do it for longer, but no, can't do it because there's food in the kitchen, right? And the Bills game is coming. But I just want to share with you, it's a place in Florida, a church called Jesus Image, and they have there on an almost weekly basis the kind of worship that has been so instrumental in teaching my heart how to be in his presence. So,
Great, thank you so much.
you're so welcome. Thank you.